society or through the light they shed on specific events or better-known individuals. The working classes, women, black and other minority ethnic groups are all being firmly reintegrated into the historical narrative, whether in the form of biography, letters and diaries or narrative history. This is particularly true when it comes to servants, for a long time dismissed as the subject of serious study. In the 1970s, when Georgina was writing down her experiences, domestic service was still a tense topic, something repudiated by the generation represented by Georgina's daughter, who had often been brought up with parents in service, but were now in a changing world, where it was increasingly seen as undesirable and not really to be talked of. Domestic service remains deeply emotive, due either to family experience or simple modern politics. There are many excellent and nuanced studies of servant life, from the 18th century to the modern day, and a number of service wings at country houses are open with costumed interpreters or volunteers specifically tasked with tackling the tendency towards easy assumptions about servant life. But media depictions, with some notable exceptions, still tend to emphasise either the cosy, nostalgic view, where overstuffed houses were staffed by bobbing parlourmaids in black gowns with white caps, or the miserable exploitative aspect, this time centred around young teenagers weeping as they scrubbed floors until their knees bled. At its peak, and although reliable statistics are impossible to obtain, domestic service was the single biggest employer of women in the UK. It's generally thought that it employed around 14% of the working population by the beginning of the 20th century. In the 1911 census, 1 in 3 women who gave their status as occupied, i.e. having an occupation, was in service. This ignores all the women who had part-time jobs, took in laundry, went out to char, or who preferred, for reasons of status or social form, to state that they were unoccupied and that their husbands or fathers could afford to keep them. Service was, in short, a huge area, and very few women would live their lives without either being a servant or employing servants, sometimes both in the course of a life. Indeed, the history of service and that of women in the Victorian period through to the Second World War are so intertwined that it is inconceivable to consider one without the other. A study of domestic service is, in many ways, the study of all women at this time. Georgina's memoir was deeply political. She wrote in response to her son-in-law's view of the past, through which she had lived, beginning with the words, "To my son-in-law, who always talks about the bad old days." By the time she started writing, she had become, like many of those who worked predominantly in large establishments and were career servants, rather reactionary. There should be no dichotomy between her view of herself as a servant who knew and valued her place and the very real achievements of her life, during which she went from rural poverty to the top of her chosen profession. But for her daughter and son-in-law, the very fact that she'd been in service negated the value of her opinions. Her own words suggest that service, a profession that she'd had little choice but to enter, was nevertheless empowering. "I feel I did give my whole life to the work I loved and enjoyed, and not only that, but the most interesting people I served and liked, who gave me the courage and inspired me to work hard, and not to feel that I had no standing in life as a cook, but to feel on a par with other walks in life." The lack of grammar is her own. Researching the life of an unknown working-class woman in the late 19th and early to mid-20th century is not easy. Apart from the fragmentary memoir, which stops in about 1895, the evidence of Georgina's life and her career is hard to trace. I first came across her when idly browsing a cookery book collection and came across a copy of Georgina's Recipes from No. 10, which was published in 1958 with a foreword by Winston Churchill. Through that, and talking to her granddaughter Edwina, who in her late 70s is Britain's oldest Ironman competitor and clearly follows in her grandmother's footsteps in terms of determination and longevity, I became hooked and determined to tell the story of a woman whose very averageness at the start of her life was part of her appeal. Georgina's life was so much like that of so many other women, except that it was not, for she was one of only a handful of female society chefs in a profession dominated at its highest levels by men, and she remained part of the workforce throughout marriage and child-rearing. Her life covers a time of enormous change in British food, from Edwardian excess to 1940s rationing, and into the era of frozen TV dinners and the whole food movement. She cooked through all of it, gaining a reputation as a superb cook, combining the best of French and English skills. She was highly driven, highly motivated, very talented and determined. However, I would not be writing about her had she not had an equally driven, motivated talent.